discipleship brings power to our lives. We've learned that it takes intentional time and effort to become a disciple. It's not accidental, or does it just sort of happen? Discipleship requires our entering into God's presence so that we can be filled with His Spirit. And discipleship requires feeding our souls. And by that we mean putting the good stuff in. Turn to a neighbor and say, you need some good stuff put in. Good stuff. Good stuff. And by that we mean things like the Bible. And that brings us here today. It brings us to the last piece of the discipleship puzzle. The piece that reminds us, actually, that we're still on the road to somewhere. Now, when I was a kid, we used to watch old movies as a family. Now, we got all 3 channels back in those days. We didn't get ABC very well very often, but we did get it once in a while. There was a mountain in the way. But every once in a while, my mother would be really excited about a movie coming on. You know, we used to take TV Guide. It was the only magazine I think we ever took at our house. Because that was before they actually put the television shows in the paper so you could follow there. She always got excited about this series of movies, 2 series really. The one today that's relevant starred Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. And there were 7 movies in this series. There were supposed to be 8, but Bing died the year that it was supposed to be filmed. And since that time, there have been about 15 different films based on this series, actually. And you all know the series if you're older than about 50, 40, 30. She knows. And it's a series called The Road. And they went all over places. They went to Bali and, you know, you have to just look it up and see all the places. Morocco and Rio. You know, I mean, everywhere. They could go. The 3 of them, you know, I can always remember Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, but it started the same woman every time, too. And I can't remember her name.
Dorothy Lamour.
Dorothy Lamour. See, I knew somebody would know. And Dorothy Lamour, in the very first film, was quoted on film a line that appears in all 7 of them. And the line that she gets to say in all 7 of them is she looks at both of the men and says, "Hey fellas, I haven't had a line in a long time." All 7 movies, that line shows up. Well, we're not on the road to somewhere like Bali or Morocco, but we are on a road. And we are on a road to joy. Now the good news is those movies were fun and funny, and you couldn't help but smile at some of the things that happened. And boy, those guys got in a lot of trouble. Well, James tells us that as disciples, one of the things that's going to happen to us is that there's going to be some trials, some troubles, some roadblocks along the way. But he says, don't worry. Don't worry about the trials that come your way. He says, in fact, look at the trials and count them as joy. Celebrate them because they make you. They make you who you are, and they make you stronger, and they're going to help you persevere in times of trouble. And they're going to identify who you are to the world. So I thought we ought to spend just a little bit of time if we're going to persevere in our life as disciples, we need to take a look and see what are some things we can do to keep on the road. Now, I'm really excited. More and more cars are coming out from Detroit and all those places in Japan that have a very, very valuable sensor in them. It's the sensor that if you get too close to the edge of the road, it beeps. It lets you know that you're driving off the road. I always thought that was kind of important. You know, I'm going to tell you my driving lesson. I actually had a driving lesson when I was 7, because that's when I started to learn to drive. Well, that's when I could push the clutch down all the way on the tractor. Now, some of you might not even know what a clutch is. My father took me out, he put me on the tractor, and he says, "Davy," he says, Robin's been giving me some fun times about that because I actually got a piece of mail this week to Davy Bondurant. I told her, I said, that means that my family sent me something. But anyway, he took me out and he said, "You're going to be driving this tractor, and this tractor weighs about 4,000 pounds, so whatever you drive at, you're going to drive over." "Okay, Dad." So he says, the really most important thing to do is to stay in the straight line. And if you're on a road, that means staying between the lines, or between, you know, because out in the country where I live, some of the roads weren't paved, so they didn't have lines. Staying between the ditches. Now he says, now the good thing is, if you drive the tractor in the ditch, you can probably drive it out. But he was right. In our world, in our life as a disciple, one of the things that we need to do is we need to steer straight. We need to see where we're going. We need to head that direction. We need to look at the target, and we need to drive the straight line. Now, there's all kinds of things that really means, but Matthew 7:13 tells us that the road to heaven is the straight and narrow road. Now, I will tell you the truth. When you're 7 years old, driving the tractor in a field was much more fun than on a road. Want to know why? The field was much wider. Much wider! I could drive over here, and come back over here, over here. Some of the roads on my farm, about as wide as this aisle, which is, ironically, exactly how wide the tractor was. You wouldn't want to get off one way or the other. We need to stare straight. We need to point the tractor, point the car, point our lives towards heaven, towards God, towards following Jesus. That means you have to keep your eye on the road. You have to keep your eye on the target. Now, the second thing we can do is we need to keep the battery charged. Any of you ever go out to your car one morning, you're ready to go to work, you're ready to go anything, you put the key in, and you go, not a good feeling, is it? Bad words start to come to mind. No one in this room ever says bad words, but they come to mind. I remember the last time that happened, and I was really glad it happened to me at my house. I was getting the van ready for Sheila's drive to a Sweet Sheila Streets event, and I had loaded everything that she needed loaded, and it was ready to go, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to set it up so the air, is ready. I was being a good husband. I got in, I put the key in, and then we... Because the truth of the matter is, it's almost always our fault when that happens, isn't it? Who has ever left the lights on? Anybody in this room leave the lights on? Or some other power-using piece of equipment? It's usually the lights for some reason. See? The good news is I caught it early enough. I was able to hook the battery charger up. And I basically checked the oil and did 3 or 4 other things while I had the hood up, being a good husband. Sheila asked me what I was doing. I didn't have to admit that I had probably killed the car's battery. Choir, don't you be telling her. It might be worth pizza or something. The fact of the matter is, our spiritual lives are just like our car's life. We have to keep the battery charged, and that means we have to keep the alternator running. And in our disciple lives, what that means is that we need to learn to wait upon the Lord, as Isaiah 40 tells us, so that we can mount up with eagle wings. In other words, we have to charge our batteries. We have to fill our brains with the good stuff. And that brings us to the third thing that we have to do. Paul wrote in Philippians 4:13, he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, so I bring him in. The other bad thing that can happen with a car, well, there are a lot of bad things that can happen with a car, but I'm thinking, you know, if you let the battery die, that's bad. If you ever run out of, go ahead and say it in your life. Gas. How many of you have ever ran out of gas? You know what? I ran out of gas when I was 16 years old in my little Ford Pinto. You want to know what the worst thing about running out of gas in my hometown was? No, there were gas stations all over town. The worst part is my Uncle Dick was the first guy to drive by and save me. You know, I didn't hear the end of that. Well, in fact, the last time I was back there, he asked me if I'd run out of gas. You know how that is, but to not run out of gas, you got to put gas in the tank.
We were by our son's house.
That might be just about as bad. The fourth thing that we can learn from being on the road is to not blow your own horn. I'll bet you've told your children that, haven't you? Don't blow your own horn. Don't brag on yourself. Don't, you know, being a disciple is about being humble. It's about being a follower of Jesus. It's about being in a relationship with God up here and us here. Following. And where Jesus leads us, we go. But if Jesus doesn't go over here, we don't go over here. Now, I know, because I've been around enough of you long enough to know that sometimes we follow Jesus real good, right? And Jesus sometimes leads over here and we go over here, right? And then Jesus leads over here, and then Jesus does, whoops, we got to go back over here, and we say, no, we like it over here. We do that, don't we? You know, because over here is comfortable. Over here is safe. Over here is where I have always been. No. We need to keep following. And part of that is being humble enough to say, yes, Lord, I'll follow you. The fifth thing that I would tell you about being disciples, we have to start, and this always gets really tricky within the Christian church, disciples of Christ. We have to obey the law. Now, that sounds good if you're out driving down the road. Of course, it was a long time before I found out that, you know, that big red sign that says stop on it didn't mean slightly tap on a pedal. It's what my father did when there was a stop sign. He tapped on the brake. There was nobody coming. You know, and I don't know how many tickets he got for actually running through a stop sign. I never saw him do it to a stoplight. You Never understood. The stoplight was more powerful than the stop sign. We have to check. And that means we have to know what some of the do's and what some of the don'ts are. If Jesus says, go here, to go there. And we have trouble with that. We have trouble with that because I'll bet every one of us in this room have at one time or another uttered these famous words. No one's going to tell me what I have to do. Or some variation thereof. The fact of the matter is, if you're more than about 2 days old, somebody's been telling you what to do. Some of you are sitting next to the person who's been telling you what to do. And you've been wondering why you keep doing it. The sixth thing, on the road to discipleship, I want you to check your brakes. Have you ever driven a car without brakes? It's fun. It's not fun, is it? It's not fun unless you know that you don't have brakes. The pickup truck that I really learned to drive on the road in, by the time it was done, it didn't have brakes. There just weren't any brakes left. It was a 1957 Dodge, 4-speed on the column, clutch, foot starter. It was fun to drive. It took an act of God and dexterity to start it. I'm not sure I can do it today because you push the clutch in with your left foot, you take your right foot and you press it down on the gas pedal, and then you pump the starter with your toe. Y'all try that right now. It's hard. It was hard when I was 16. But that truck, by the time I was 16, had no brakes left. So you had to plan ahead. We didn't really drive it on the road at that point. We would drive it up to the bus stop. And the bus stop was at the top of the hill. We had a half-mile lane from the house to the bus stop. You drove it up there, and you had to figure it out just right so that you would stop at the top of the hill. Now, going down the hill wasn't a problem. The problem is the road on the other side was a ditch. So you couldn't not stop. And there were more times than I care to remember of this movement at the top of the hill. Boom! Throw the back into the truck. Makes you want to go out and drive with me, doesn't it? But in discipleship, checking the brake means looking at Proverbs 16:32, which calls us to be slow to anger so we can be mighty in action. This is about self-control, being in control of who we are in our lives, and letting God dictate our control. It means not letting our anger get the best of us, not letting our emotions get the best of us. Because you see, self-control helps us from wrecking the truck, from driving into the wall, from causing an accident. Now the fifth, or the seventh piece of driving the road to discipleship is to study a map, or study the map. You see, what I've discovered is that life is mostly a maze. Most of us entered into the maze at our birth, and for part of the journey, our parents have helped us along, right? You know, they said, don't do this, so we did. And you know what a maze is? A maze is one of those things where you come in here, and you come in, and then you have to choose which way to go. And you go like this. And if you're doing the Wonder Maze in the newspaper, I've learned that it's always faster to do it backwards. But then I had somebody tell me that was cheating because life is never ran in reverse. It's true, isn't it? You see, so we've entered into the maze of life. And what happens if you make the wrong turn? You run into a dead end. So then you have to go back and choose another way. And you're working your way through it. And you're hoping that as you work your way through the maze, going left and right, that you come out at the other end. But oftentimes what happens is we spend all of our time going in circles. And I think, wouldn't it be nice if there wasn't a map of life? Wouldn't it be nice if when, on the day that you were born, you were given the maze with the lines drawn in for you, so you know where to go? Well, God said no. The only map you need is the map to follow me. You see, here's one of the really cool things, is the other piece is to be with somebody who has the map. Because if you're with somebody who already has the map, you have a guy. We call him Jesus. I was reminded of this today, actually. Some of you may know who Toby Keith is. He's got this song out. It's got a great line in it. If you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. And isn't that the truth? My friends, in the world of becoming a disciple, in the faith world that we live, discipleship isn't really a destination, it's about being. But if we don't know that, we're going to keep thinking it's about doing. You see, discipleship, while it's not a destination, has one we'll all end up at one day. That's why we need to get this right now. We need to understand that discipleship's not about doing, it's about being. We need to be opening our lives up as disciples to the power that's ours. We need to be intentional about our discipleship, taking the time that it requires, entering into God's presence, feeding the hunger of our spirits. What I like best about this last bit is that it's the why. Why do we want to be a disciple? And the answer is because discipleship brings us to real, true, and lasting joy. When we live in real relationship with Jesus, when we follow Him, when we love Him with all that we are, when we find our strength in Him, when we learn to trust in Him, and when we shape our lives to be like Him, the result is always the same. Always. And that result is a joy-filled life. My friends, if your life isn't filled with joy, I can tell you today that something's missing. And we can find out what it is. Let your life be filled with